Whenever you learn a new game, one of the first things you need to know is how to win. This gives you context towards the rest of the rules and mechanics and helps put things into perspective. This is also true for when you're designing the game, as knowing how the players win goes hand in hand with the rest of your design and gives it purpose. So how do you win in card games? Win conditions for card games can be split up into three main categories: the value to defend, the value to obtain, and card text. Let's start with the historically most used category, the value to defend. This is where you have some sort of value, and if it reaches usually 0, you lose the game. So this would be your traditional life total, but also the card-based life as found in the shield system in Duel Masters. It is also where you find deck out, which is more of a secondary fallback win condition to make sure the game eventually ends. So essentially, you win if you manage to bring down your opponent's life total to 0, or whatever the value to defend is, while yours is still above 0. Now, for all intended purposes, the aim is to bring your opponent's life total to 0, and that is how you win the game. But technically speaking, you win because you were the last player standing with a positive life balance. This shows to be true if you are in a tournament and it goes into time, where you then often determine the winner by which player has the highest life total left. It becomes even more clear in multiplayer formats, as in a 3-player game. If somehow your two opponents manage to defeat each other at the same time, this leaves you, as the last player standing, with a positive life balance, and you just won, without having actively defeated a single player. So this is the reason why it falls under the value to defend, rather than anything else, despite it usually being phrased as player elimination. So some notable examples are Magic the Gathering with 20 life, you have Yu-Gi-Oh! With 8,000 life points, Hearthstone with 30 life, and Duel Masters with 5 shields, although in Duel Masters' case you need to attack one more time after the 5 shields are depleted. Now in contrast we have the value to obtain, which would be various forms of victory points. So instead of needing to defend a value and reduce your opponents to 0, you try to obtain a certain amount of victory points to win the game, and of course preventing your opponent from doing the same. While value to defend has been the main go-to in card games for a long time, we've seen examples of games that instead use victory points, and this is becoming more and more popular with newer releases. Some notable examples are Pokémon with its 6 prize cards, Keyforge, where you need to forge 3 keys, and each key requires you to have 6 Ember to forge it, Gwent, where you need to obtain the highest point value through 2 out of 3 rounds, Lorcana, where you need to reach 20 lore, and Riftbound, where you need to obtain 8 points through conquering and holding battlefields. Lastly, we have the card text category, which, pretty self-explanatory, is winning through the text of the cards. Now, when it comes to designing your game, it is mainly the value to defend and value to obtain that will act as your main win condition. I don't believe I know of any card game where the main win condition is to win through card text. The closest would probably be the Lord of the Rings LCG with its quests, however even that is leaning more towards victory points, as you need a certain amount of progress tokens on a quest to complete it and move on to the next quest and eventually win the game. It is however still important to keep all win conditions in mind when designing your game, from the main win condition to backup win conditions and any alternative win conditions that may fit your game. Be careful though, as having multiple win conditions often results in your players playing different games. As an example, players choosing to build a deck around an alternate win condition such as deck out or a card text will often end up playing a more solitaire game with only just enough interaction with the opponent to stay in the game long enough to pull off their alternate win. Therefore, you need to be mindful when creating more than one win condition, as while they can be useful or open up some niche and fun ways to play the game, they can also very quickly become disliked by the overall community. So while they have their place, they need to be limited to make sure your players can all interact with each other and get to play the game. When we talk about a primary win condition, there are some pros and cons depending on which category you choose. The reason why the value to defend has been the most popular ever since the beginning, I believe, is due to 1. Magic the Gathering did it first and everyone else just copied that, and 2. It makes logical sense. When you have a card game with units that can attack each other, it is only a logical step that they would also be able to use that same mechanic to attack the player directly. This both makes use of an already existing mechanic, but also incentivizes players to play cards to the field to defend their life total and prevent excessive stalling. Having no units to defend you means your opponent gets to attack your life total for free. A good example of just how much of a benefit this is to the value to defend category would be Gwent, a game in the value to obtain category. In Gwent, you do not have a health total, and thus units cannot even attack. Instead, you need to win 2 out of 3 rounds by having the highest power total. While you cannot attack with your cards, you can still interact with other cards, usually on play, activated abilities, or as engines while in play, generating value over multiple turns. So what happens when a player decides they don't want to play any units? It completely takes the interactive element out of the game. Players came up with a deck running only a few units, all designed specifically to either play more spells or gain power for each spell played in that game. So the deck strategy would simply be to use removal spells to deal with opposing units while not playing any themselves, meaning any of the opponent's interacting or removal cards were essentially dead or at a very low value. At the final turns of the game, it would then slam down enormous units scaling with the amount of spells played, creating immense value that was hard to beat in such a short time. This type of strategy eventually led Gwent to introduce a minimum unit requirement for deck building in the game, to force players to put at least some units in their deck. Unfortunately, Value to Defend falls a bit short when it comes to multiplayer formats. While not impossible to do, it often leads to situations where a player will get knocked out early and need to wait for the remaining players to finish, which obviously is quite boring for that player. They are essentially excluded from the game due to how the game is won. I believe this is why Value to Obtain has started to get a lot more popular, as it natively fixes this. No matter how many players are in the game, once just a single player reaches the goal, they win. No waiting around for the game to finish, that's it, and they can start a new game. Star Wars Unlimited has tried to solve this issue in the Value to Defend category by making it so that in multiplayer formats, once a player is knocked out, everyone else left in the game gets to finish the current phase, and then they compare life totals. The player with the highest life total then wins the game. This is an interesting take on it, as it also makes players think twice about eliminating a player early. If I eliminate this player, would I be able to successfully guard my life total and stay ahead of the remaining players? No? Then maybe I need to wait a little bit. Value to Obtain, however, is not perfect either. While it may be good for multiplayer, it takes more work to tie it all together. As mentioned with the example from Gwent, you don't inherently have a mechanic to incentivize players to play cards onto the field, and there can be a lot of different routes in how you obtain the victory points, and not all being easy to implement or share mechanics with the rest of the game rules. A lot of games have taken the route that units can take an action to get a victory point. However, this is by default not interactive with the opponent, so something to keep in mind. Whichever win condition you settle on for your card game will determine the overall gameplay loop, and there are no rights or wrongs. All that matters is that it is fun and engaging, and I think there is still a lot to explore when it comes to new and interesting ways to win, be that a Value to Defend, a Value to Obtain, or something else entirely. So thank you very much for watching, I hope you enjoyed. There will be a video somewhere on the screen that may be of interest to you, and I will see you next time.